Hello and welcome to the Columbia Daily Tribune's Behind the Stripes webcast. This is Tribune sports editor Joe Walljasper along with Tribune football beat writer Dave Matter. Dave? New set.
A little different this week, huh?
New set for the postseason.
That's right.
Missouri coming off a 35-7 win over Kansas, a game that wasn't really competitive, so we will just sort of gloss that over.
Sure.
We'll move right along to postseason. Missouri gets a bid to the Insight Bowl against Iowa. A little bit surprising, I think. We've kind of become conditioned to Missouri falling down to maybe the last possible place they could.
Right.
Not really the case this year. Just discuss maybe your theories on how that happened, particularly how Missouri maybe ended up ahead of Nebraska.
Yeah, that's the big thing. They went to a bowl ahead of Nebraska in the pecking order. Now, Missouri does have a better ranking. They're 6 spots ahead of Nebraska in the BCS. They have 1 fewer loss, but Nebraska's 1 more loss is because they played in the Big 12 championship game. So publicly, the folks at the Insight Bowl and Missouri, of course, are saying, well, it's because our resume is better at this point. But the Insight Bowl, of course, matches a Big 12 team and it's a Big 10 team. In this case, it's going to be Iowa. It would have been Nebraska-Iowa potentially, and I think that would have been a huge game. I think they would have attracted a lot of people from both fan bases. But, of course, Nebraska's leaving this year to go to the Big 10, and the Insight Bowl being a Big 12 bowl, partnered with the Fiesta Bowl, also in Arizona, which is the Big 12 BCS Bowl. I think it's pretty obvious the Big 12 didn't want a Big 10 matchup taking place in one of their bowl games. And I don't think we'll ever know. Maybe we'll find out, maybe hear some things when we're down there in Tempe in a couple weeks. But no one will ever say that the Big 12 came in and went to bat for Missouri and made sure that this was still a Big 12, Big 10 matchup. Because otherwise it would have been a 4-hour Big 10 regular season game almost, and the Big 12 wouldn't want that.
Yeah, but from Missouri's perspective, I think you could argue that Nebraska deserved it competitively, maybe. I think we all agreed that there was the teams at the top of the Big 12, you could almost put them in a hat. Because Nebraska did beat Missouri head-to-head, but everybody ended up beating everybody. But just the fact that from the Fiesta or from the Insight Bowl's point of view, you're almost taking what could have been a guaranteed sellout and making it a situation where it's very, very questionable. I mean, what sort of projections are you hearing from Missouri attendance-wise, and maybe how important is it that they travel well for whatever happens down the road?
It's really important because, as we know, and as Missouri fans know, and Missouri players and coaches and administrators know, if you're not in the BCS, it all comes down to your fan attendance. TV appeal is part of it, but really how can you sell your allotment of tickets? And Nebraska has a great track record of doing that. Missouri really doesn't, outside of when they went to the Cotton Bowl a couple of years ago, but that was a better bowl. It was an exciting matchup. And when Missouri's gone to the perceived lesser bowls, they haven't sold as well. So I think this is the pressure's on Missouri. I mean, they have to respond here. Otherwise, it could impact such decisions down the road when they're faced with a chance to go to one of these bowl games or a BCS bowl.
That's really the issue, too, because between the Insider holiday, not that big a deal.
Right,
but if it comes down to where you're eligible for a BCS bowl and you don't get it based on fans in, that's when it's a problem. And that maybe isn't necessarily the reason they lost out on the Orange Bowl in 2007, but that played a role in it.
Sure.
Looking forward to this game, if you look at the early odds on it, it's basically a pick'em game, which seems a little odd. Missouri's 10-2, Iowa 7-5, and having lost their last 3 games. Just your thoughts on what that says about A, the perception of Missouri, or B, the perception of Iowa, or the perception of their conferences?
Yeah, I think Iowa is seen as a team that's a lot better than its record. I think their 5 losses have been decided by a total of 18 points, so they've been close games. But they finished the year with 3 losses, like you mentioned. Lost to Northwestern. Northwestern hasn't been the same since they lost their quarterback, and they lost to Minnesota. That's a bad loss. That's the Big 12, Big 10 equivalent of losing to, like, Colorado, I think. And they had a lame duck coach at that point, or vacant coaching spot up until a few days ago. So that's a bad loss. They've got talent. They were picked by some people to win the Big 10, myself included. I had them number 2 in a preseason poll. I thought they were that talented. But Iowa's kind of a funny team where they seem to have good seasons when the expectations aren't as high, and the other way around when they're not expected to do as much. And you wonder, are they that excited about this game? Could they maybe be the Missouri of 2010, and maybe Missouri could be the Navy this time around, where Missouri's more excited about this matchup than Iowa is. So it'll be interesting to see how they come into it. You look at the numbers, and in some levels, the teams I think are fairly evenly matched. They're 6th and 7 in scoring defense nationally. So I think that would make you think it's going to be a low-scoring game. But a lot can change over the course of the 4 or 5 week break that they have between their last game and the bowl game.
It's kind of I think it really is more of a referendum on the conferences. I think at the top, the Big Ten is better this year. I think Ohio State and Wisconsin are better than anybody the Big 12 has. But once you get down to the rank and file, I don't know that the Big Ten is necessarily stronger than the Big 12. I think in recent history it hasn't been, so I don't know why this year would be any different. Look at Iowa, too. They should have probably lost to Indiana. They could very easily have lost their last 4 games. And Indiana's been really a punching bag team. Their coach loses their job. So really, you look at what they've got, it's a little bit of a mystery why they did struggle. Stanzi's had a good year. He had a lot of interceptions last year. This year he really cut back on that. I think he's got 25 touchdowns, 4 interceptions. They got stars on defense. It doesn't really seem to add up, but it just ended up in a lot of close games. And whereas they were winning them all last year, this year they've lost 5.
They were the great comeback team last year. I mean, they'd be losing in fourth quarter a bunch of times and came back to win. And sometimes it just goes against you.
Okay. This is a deal. Iowa is a team that, even though they're a team in Big Ten country, they end up with a lot of Big 12 players. They recruit Texas and they recruit St. Louis. They've got 2 of their best players, Adrian Claiborne and Marvin McNutt, are from St. Louis, so Missouri kind of butts heads with them. What sort of does that in any way maybe make this a little bit of a grudge match from Missouri's point of view? You're trying to win over the city of St. Louis and kind of make a little fence around it. Or from the other side of the coin, Missouri's got a couple Iowa kids, the Hoke brothers, that Iowa would like to have.
Right. I don't know if you can put too much stock into that if it's just one game. Now, if it's a series that they would play year after year, then I think you can. Like Missouri, Illinois, you don't see Missouri losing kids to Illinois very much anymore because they've dominated that series when they've played. One game, though, I'm not really sure. If you can have much more than kind of just bragging rights, like David Yost, Missouri's offensive coordinator, the other day said, it's kind of a bragging rights situation where you go into the living room of a kid. He says, I'm also looking at Iowa. His response was, why would you want to go to Iowa? We just beat them. Well, you could say it this one time. He also said if they lose the game, then you don't even bring it up. You just pretend the game didn't happen. So neither team will stop recruiting the same players that they're going up against, depending on what happens in this game. But it is kind of interesting that Iowa, they have had some success getting kids out of the St. Louis area. And they don't just recruit St. Louis. They go to the Kansas City side. Yost said he sees them down in Springfield a lot, and there's obviously a big recruit down in Springfield for the future. So, and they also have come across some guys in Texas that they've both gone after. So it is interesting in that aspect also. All
right, just quickly looking back on a few things from this season. MVP, Missouri has its banquet, and I think maybe 15 players got a vote for team MVP. Michael Egnew ends up getting it. Just your thoughts on, in your mind, maybe who the MVP of the team was?
I would kind of lean towards Andrew Gachkar. I think maybe the MVP should come from the defensive side of the ball because that was the group that was so good and so consistent. And it's hard to pick one guy on that defense because it seemed like every week it was somebody different. But he was probably the most consistent. I think he really became a leader on that side of the ball. Led them or shared the lead in just about every statistic imaginable. Had a great game against Kansas to end the season. So I'd lean towards him on offense. Maybe go with T.J. Moe. His numbers kind of went down as the season went on because he was leading the country in a bunch of categories early on. But he's the one guy I think you can say actually won a game for Missouri with the big catch against and run against San Diego State. So I'd go with those two, but I'd probably lean towards Gachkar just because the defense was so solid this year.
All right, and then lastly, we're going to have our last viewer mail of the season.
This is it. This is from Mike from Iowa City. So we've got some readers from Iowa paying attention. How does Missouri's defensive line match up with the Hawkeyes' offensive line, and vice versa? Can this be a game that's kind of defined in the trenches there? I think it's a good point. You think of Big Ten football, you think of Iowa, you kind of think of a big, strong lineman. I mean, over the years, Iowa's put a lot of players in the NFL that played on the offensive line, the defensive line. They've had a bunch of tight ends, linebackers. They kind of play that smash mouth style, which isn't necessarily Missouri style, especially on offense. So I think you kind of got a contrast there. They've got a very good defensive front. You mentioned Claiborne. Christian Ballard is their other defensive end. He's a kid from Lawrence, Kansas that Missouri really wanted, and they wanted him as a tight end. So he's obviously pretty athletic. and then they've always got good defensive tackles up front. What's kind of interesting, if you look at their depth chart, their defensive ends are both about 20 pounds heavier than their defensive tackles. So they've got big, strong guys on the outside that are much different than the type of defensive ends Missouri has, like Alden Smith, Jacquez Smith, which are almost look more like linebackers sometimes. So it'll be an interesting battle up front. They play really physical. Kirk Friend's teams are known for being that way. But Missouri, I think they can play physical too, especially on defense. And this time off, these next few weeks are going to help them get healthy, get Will Ebner back healthy. You won't be relying on guys to move positions around as much on defense like they have been. So I think this time off is going to help Missouri look like a more physical defense also.
All right, well, thanks for joining us, and thanks for joining us this whole season. It's been fun doing the webcast, and we will, I guess we won't be back until 2011 to recap.